Hello, all you wonderful listeners. I'm starting a story called The Wizard of Oz. I have 13 chapters. I will start with chapter 1 and read for approximately a half an hour and then continue this series over multiple videos. I tried to do it as one long video, and you can hear it in my voice the disappointment, hours of editing and reading down the tube. So, in order not to have that happen again, the movies will be a little shorter. Let's go on a journey to the Wizard of Oz. Thank you all, awesome listeners. Let's get started. Chapter 1: The Cyclone. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made one room. And this room contained a rusty-looking cooking stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed in one corner, and Dorothy a little bed in another corner. There was no garret at all, and no cellar, except a small dark hole dug in the ground, called the Cyclone cellar, where the family could go in case one of those great whirlwinds arose, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trap door in the middle of the floor, from which a ladder led down into a small, dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a tree or a house broke the broad sweep of flat country. The sun had baked and plowed the land into a gray mass. Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burned the blades until they were the same gray color. The house was as dull and gray as everything else. When Aunt Em came there to live, she was a young, pretty wife. The sun and the wind had changed her, too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes and the red from her cheeks and left them a sober gray. She never smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter that whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears, she looked at the little girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning until night. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots, and he rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her surroundings. Toto was a little black dog with long silky hair and black eyes that twinkled merrily. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky, too. From the far north they heard a small, low wail of a wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming storm. Now there came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly, Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock." He ran towards the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger close at hand. "Quick, Dorothy," she screamed. "Run for the cellar." Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed. and the girls started to get him. Aunt Em threw open the trap door in the floor and climbed down the ladder into the small, dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek from the wind, and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly on the floor. Then a strange thing happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon. The great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained and was carried miles and miles away, as easily as you could carry a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few whirls around, she felt as if she were being rocked gently, like a baby in a cradle. Hour after hour passed, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright. But she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked loudly all about her. At first she wondered if she would be dashed to pieces when the house fell again. But as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly. At last she crawled over to the swaying floor to her bed, and Toto followed and laid down beside her. In spite of the swaying house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. Chapter 2. The Council with the Munchkins. Dorothy was awakened by a shock that made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened. Toto put his little nose into her face and whined. She sprang from her bed and, with Toto at her heels, ran and opened the door. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked around her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderment of the sights that she saw. The cyclone had set the house down very gently, for a cyclone, in the midst of a country of marvelous beauty. There were stately trees bearing luscious fruits all about. Banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and birds with brilliant plumage sang in the trees and bushes. While she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed coming toward her a group of the oddest people she has ever seen. They were not as big as grown folk she's used to, but neither were they very small. In fact, they seemed about as tall as Dorothy, although they looked many years older. 3 were men and 1 a woman, and all were oddly dressed. They wore round hats that rose to a point, with little bells around the brims that twinkled sweetly as they moved. The hats of the men were blue. The little woman's hat was white, and she wore a white gown sprinkled with little stars that glistened in the sun. The men were about as old as Uncle Henry, but the little woman was much older. Her face was covered with wrinkles, her hair was neatly white, and she walked rather stiffly. When these people drew near the house, the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a low bow, and said, "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We are so grateful to you for having killed the wicked witch of the East and for setting our people free from bondage." Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean by calling her a sorceress and saying she had killed the wicked witch of the East? Dorothy had never killed anything in her life. Dorothy said with hesitation, "You are very kind, but there must be some mistake. I have not killed anything." "Your house did anyway," replied the little old woman with a laugh. "And that is the same thing, see? There are there are her 2 feet still sticking out from under a block of wood. Dorothy looked and gave a cry of fright. Just under the corner of the house, 2 feet were sticking out, shod in silver shoes. She was the Wicked Witch of the East, said the little woman calmly. She has held all the Munchkins in bondage for many years, making them slave for her night and day. Now they are all set free, and are grateful to you for the favor. Who are the Munchkins? Inquired Dorothy. They are the people who live in this land, east of where the Wicked Witch ruled, replied the old woman. Are you a Munchkin? Asked Dorothy. No, but I am their friend. I am the Witch of the North, but I am a good witch, and the people love me. Just then, the Munchkins gave a loud shout and pointed to the corner of the house. The little old woman laughed. The feet of the dead witch had disappeared entirely, and nothing was left but the silver shoes. She was so old, explained the Witch of the North, that she dried up quickly in the sun. That is the end of her, but the silver shoes are yours. She picked up the shoes, and after shaking the dust out of them, handed them to Dorothy. There are some charm. There is some charm connected with them, but what it is we never knew. I am anxious to get back to my aunt and uncle, for I am sure they will worry about me, said Dorothy. Can you help me find my way? The witch shook her head. A great desert surrounds the land of Oz. You must go to the City of Emeralds. Perhaps Oz, the great wizard, will help you. He is a good wizard. How can I get there? Asked Dorothy. The road to the City of Emeralds is paved with yellow brick, said the witch, so you cannot miss it. You must walk. It is a long journey through a country that is sometimes pleasant and sometimes dark and terrible. However, I will use all the magic arts I know to keep you from harm. No one will dare injure a person who has been kissed by the Witch of the North. She came close to Dorothy and kissed her gently on her forehead. Her lips left a round, shiny mark. Then the witch whirled around on her left heel 3 times and straightway disappeared, much to the surprise of little Toto, who barked after her. But Dorothy, knowing her to be a witch, had expected her to disappear in just that way and was not surprised in the least. Chapter 3. How Dorothy Saved the Scarecrow. When Dorothy was left alone, she set about making ready for the journey to the City of Emeralds. She had only one other dress, which was hanging on a peg beside her bed. The girl dressed herself in a clean gingham with checks of white and blue and tied her pink sunbonnet on her head. She took a little basket and filled it with bread from the cupboard, laying a white cloth over the top. Then she looked down at her feet and noticed how old and worn her shoes were. They surely will never do for a long journey, Toto, she said. And Toto looked up into her face with his little black eyes and wagged his tail to show he knew what she meant. At that moment, Dorothy saw the silver shoes that had belonged to the Wicked Witch of the East. I wonder if they'll fit me, she said to Toto. They would be just the thing to take on a long walk. She took off her old leather shoes and tried on the silver ones, which fitted her as well as if they had been made for her. Finally, she picked up her basket. Come along, Toto, she said. We will go to the City of Emeralds and ask the Great Oz how to get back to Kansas again. She closed the door, locked it, and put the key carefully in the pocket of her dress. And so, with Toto trotting along soberly behind her, she started on her journey. There were several roads nearby, but it did not take her long to find the one paved with yellow bricks. Within a short time, she was walking briskly toward the Emerald City, her silver shoes twinkling merrily on the hard yellow brick. The sun shone bright and the birds sang sweetly, and Dorothy did not feel nearly so bad as you might think a little girl who had been suddenly set down in the midst of a strange land would. She was surprised as she walked along to see how pretty the country was about her. There were neat fences at the sides of the road, painted a dainty blue color, and beyond them were fields of grain and vegetables in abundance. Once in a while she would pass a house, and the people came out to look at her and bow low as she went by, for everyone knew she had been the means of destroying the wicked witch and setting them free. The houses of the Munchkins were odd looking dwellings, for each was round, with a big dome for a roof. All were painted blue, for in this country of the East, blue was the favorite color. Toward evening, when Dorothy was tired with her long walk, she came to a house rather larger than the rest. On the green lawn before it, many men and women were dancing. 5 little fiddlers played as loudly as possible, and the people were laughing and singing, while a big table nearby was loaded with delicious fruits, nuts, pies, cakes, and many other good things to eat. The people greeted Dorothy kindly and invited her to supper and to pass the night with them, for they were gathered to celebrate their freedom from the bondage of the wicked witch. Dorothy was waited upon by the Munchkins, whose name was Bach. As she watched the people dance, when Bach saw her silver shoes, he said, "You must be a great sorceress." "Why?" asked the girl. "Because you wear silver shoes and have killed the wicked witch. Besides, you have white on your frock, and only witches and sorceresses wear white." "My dress is blue and white checked," said Dorothy. "It is kind of you to wear that," said Bach. "Blue is the color of the Munchkins, and white is a witch color, so we know you are a friendly witch." Dorothy did not know what to say about this, for all the people seemed to think her a witch, and she knew very well she was only an ordinary little girl. When she had tired, Bach led her into the house, where he gave her a room with a pretty bed in it. Dorothy slept soundly until morning, with Toto curled up beside her. The next morning she ate a hearty breakfast and asked, "How far is it to the Emerald City?" "I do not know," answered Bach gravely, "for I have never been there. But it is a long way to the Emerald City, and it will take you many days. The country here is rich and pleasant, but if but you must pass through rough and dangerous places before you reach the end of your journey." This worried Dorothy a little, but she knew that only the Great Oz could help her get back to Kansas. So she bravely resolved not to turn back. She bade her friends a good-bye and again started along the road of yellow brick. When she had gone several miles, she thought she would stop and rest, and so climbed on top of the fence beside the road and sat down. There was a great cornfield beyond the fence, and not far away she saw a scarecrow placed high on a pole to keep the birds from the ripe corn. Dorothy leaned her chin upon her hand and gazed thoughtfully at the scarecrow. Its head was a small sack stuffed with straw, with eyes, nose, and a mouth painted on it to represent a face. Dorothy was surprised to see one of the eyes slowly wink at her. She thought she must have been mistaken at first, for none of the scarecrows in Kansas ever wink. But presently the figure nodded to her in a friendly way. "Good day," said the scarecrow in a rather husky voice. "Do you speak?" asked the girl, in wonder. Certainly, answered the Scarecrow. How do you do? I am pretty well, thank you, replied Dorothy politely. How do you do? I'm not feeling well, said the Scarecrow with a smile, for it is very tedious being perched up here day and night to scare away crows. Can't you get down? Asked Dorothy. No, for this pole has me stuck on up my back. If you would please take away the pole, I shall be greatly obliged to you. Dorothy lifted the figure off the pole. For being stuffed with straw, it was quite light. Thank you. I feel like a new man, said the Scarecrow, when he had stretched himself and yawned. Who are you, and where are you going? My name is Dorothy, said the girl. I'm going to the Emerald City to ask the great Oz to send me back to Kansas. Where is the Emerald City? He inquired. And who is Oz? Why, don't you know? She returned in surprise. No, indeed, I don't know anything, you see. I'm stuffed, so I have no brains at all, he answered sadly. Do you think if I go to the Emerald City with you, that the Oz would give me some brains? I cannot tell, she returned, but you may come with me if you like. If Oz will not give you any brains, you will be no worse off than you are now. That is true, said the Scarecrow. You see, he continued confidently, I don't mind my body being stuffed because I cannot get hurt. But I do not want people to call me a fool, and if my head stays stuffed with straw instead of brains, as yours is, how am I ever to know anything? They walked back to the road and started along the path of yellow brick for the Emerald City. Toto smelled around the stuffed man and growled in an unfriendly way at the Scarecrow. Don't mind you, Toto, said Dorothy to her new friend. He never bites. Oh, I'm not afraid. He can't hurt the straw. There's only one thing in the world I am afraid of. A lighted match, replied the Scarecrow. At noon, they sat down by the roadside to rest. Tell me something about yourself and the country you came from, said the Scarecrow. She told him about Kansas and how gray everything was there, and how the cyclone had carried her to the land of Oz. The Scarecrow listened carefully and said, I cannot understand why you should wish to leave this beautiful country and go back to the dry, gray place you call Kansas. That is because you have no brains, answered the girl. No matter how dreary and gray our homes are, we people would rather live there than in any other country. There's no place like home. Toward evening, they came to a great forest, where the trees grew so big and close together that their branches met over the road of yellow brick and shut out the daylight. But the travelers did not stop and went on into the forest. The Scarecrow, he declared, he could see as well as by day, led her through the trees until they reached a cottage. Dorothy entered and lay down at once, and with Toto beside her, soon fell into a sound sleep. The Scarecrow, who was never tired, stood up in a corner and waited patiently until morning came. And that concludes chapter 3. The Rescue of the Tin Woodman is chapter 4, and we will continue that on another day. Everybody sleep tight and don't let the bed bugs bite, and we will continue with chapter 4 next. Good night.